Happy Wednesday, everybody, and welcome into GC Live here on Gamecock Central. Kendall Smith and Jack Veltri coming at you here. We hope you're having a great day so far. And Jack, it is good to be back. I'm sorry I missed last week. I was in Arizona for spring training, about to start baseball season. You were actually here last night in Uptown Charlotte at Truist Field for South Carolina and North Carolina's game. We'll get into that in just a second. But before we do, how are you, Jack?
Long time no see, Kendall. Yeah, I ran into you yesterday at the game, and it's good seeing you as always. But yeah, no, I hope you had a good time in Arizona. I know we spoke briefly about that yesterday. It seemed like things went well, but do you want to share how everything went out there and what you were doing?
It was great. Yeah, I was there at White Sox spring training. I work for the Charlotte Knights. They're the AAA affiliate of the Chicago White Sox. We had a blast. Spring training is always so much fun. The vibes are so high. Everyone is in such a good mood. So I always enjoy it so much. And I'm very grateful for the chance to go out there. So spent last week in Glendale, Arizona, doing that at spring training. And we have opening night on Friday here at Truist Field. So baseball season is already here for the professional level. We've obviously been in the midst of college baseball season for quite some time, which we can talk about. Jack and I were able to see each other last night. As he mentioned, we haven't seen each other in a while. It's been months.
It's been a little. I can't really think of the last time we would have seen each other in person. Like, it's so weird because we're always on live together, like every week. So it feels like I'm always seeing you. But yeah, in person, gosh, it's probably been a little bit, I would say.
Yeah, several months. So it was great to see you last night. Unfortunately for South Carolina, the game didn't go exactly how they wanted to. A couple points there later in the game where you thought, okay, maybe South Carolina can kind of work their way out of this one and come away with the win. They did not against the Tar Heels. And we'll kind of get into some of the struggles of the baseball team here in just a bit. But before we do, we got to give a shout out to our presenting sponsor of GC Live, Jack.
That's right. So right above us here, if you're watching on screen or if you're listening wherever you get your podcasts from later, I'm talking about Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. So maybe you're in the market to potentially buy a home, or you're interested in getting help with your mortgage, but you have no idea where to begin. Clint can help you out. He's been in the mortgage industry for a very long time now. He's a lifelong Gamecock fan. He's also a longtime supporter of Gamecock Central and all of our GC Live programs. So if you're interested, he'll help you out through the process step by step. So you can give him a call, 803-422-6797. The NMLS number for him is 71597. Or you can go to ClintHammond.com for more info.
We appreciate Clint and all he does for Gamecock Central and GC Live. Okay, Jack, let's get into last night's game. We'll start with baseball, and then we'll talk about football a little bit because today's some player availability for the media, so we'll get into that in just a bit. But want to start off with last night's game. As I mentioned, tough loss for South Carolina against North Carolina here in Uptown Charlotte. And, you felt like there were points in that game, especially to start things off, back-to-back home runs. You're like, okay, South Carolina's starting off strong. North Carolina takes a lead. South Carolina kind of battles back. But ultimately, North Carolina comes away with the win. And unfortunately for the Gamecocks, they have just been struggling as of late. And this is something we've seen on a consistent basis from them. So let's start with last night's game, and then we'll talk about kind of the overarching problems in your opinion, Jack. But what did you see last night here in Uptown Charlotte that you felt like ultimately led to South Carolina's loss?
I think you got to start with the pitching. I think that's where it really begins and ends, because when you score 8 runs, that's enough to win a game, right? Most times. But this pitching staff, and that is an overarching issue that noticed over the last few games here, it was rough last night. Giving up 13 runs on 12 hits, you strike out 10, and then you give up 13 free passes, 11 walks, and 2 hit by pitches. That was just not good enough. And for the most part, I mean, like you said, it started out strong for South Carolina with those 2 home runs to open the game by Nathan Hall and Ethan Petrie. But, after a clean first inning from Brendan Sweeney to start the game, I mean, the bullpen was just like hideously bad. I mean, most of the night, outside of a few 1-inning clean appearances by guys like Ashton Crowther and Roman Kimball and Aiden Palmer, really nothing to write home about. And Caleb Jones too. Every other guy, I mean, I think there were 7 guys last night that gave up at least 1 run out of the bullpen. And the other part of the issue was the amount of home runs they were giving up. Now, as you know, Kendall, I feel like Truist Field is not the biggest ballpark. I think, when
Hitter friendly.
it's very hitter friendly. And I think the location of it, given that it's right in the middle of the city, I feel like you only have so much room to work with in terms of when they were building the ballpark about 10, 15 years ago. But I mean, it's a very small ballpark. It does not take much to hit the ball, especially out to right field. And, the wind that seemed to be blowing a little bit last night was a nice evening out. This is what's going to happen when it gets into the warmer months. Here's the ball's going to be flying off the bat. And unfortunately for South Carolina's pitching, they were suspect to that with giving up 4 home runs last night in the loss. So again, this game really does come down to just how bad the pitching was, and there's nothing more to say. I mean, it was just a game that you score 8 runs, like I said, you should win that game. No excuses. But given that it was a bullpen game, it just really wasn't South Carolina's night from a pitching standpoint.
Well, and if you're South Carolina, you obviously hope that these midweek games can kind of pick you up a little bit. I mean, a tough last weekend, and we really feel like things kind of started to go wrong for the Gamecocks after that Clemson series. And ever since then, it's been tough in a lot of ways for this Gamecock baseball team to really find consistency and be able to patch together wins. And, you've seen that, Jack, obviously, because you've been traveling and on the road with the team, and you've kind of seen all of this come to what it is. So when you look at it, they start off the season strong, and obviously maybe they weren't playing the toughest opponents at that time, but we've gotten to this point now. And I think we need to start with something positive. So for fans that are out there watching and they're like, I've given up hope on this season, there is no hope left. Jack, can you tell them that, is there any hope left?
Well, of course there's still hope left. We still have half a season left to go in the regular season. So look, I know everyone wants to be, down on their luck right now. Season's done. This team sucks. All this nonsense, yada, yada. Look, it's baseball. South Carolina is in a ridiculously hard league in the SEC. You're playing Arkansas and Tennessee, who are the top 2 teams in the country in back-to-back weekends. Clemson's very good. North Carolina's pretty good. You're 1-9 against ranked teams. But I think if there's any silver lining, it's not like you're losing games to teams that are below you, like teams that you should be beating all the time. They've taken care of business in that way. So they've proven they can beat lower quality teams. That's not the issue. The issue is finding out, okay, how are we going to beat the SEC teams of the world? And it's just not happening right now. The good news is I think the schedule after this weekend, I don't want to say lightens up because it never really does, but it's never going to get as hard as playing the top 2 teams in the nation. Like, you got road trips to Mississippi State and Texas A&M coming up over the next 2 weeks. Those are 2 teams that I think you can go out there and potentially win a series against. And then you got, Florida, Kentucky, Auburn, LSU. I feel like LSU and Florida are probably your next 2 hardest series, but they're nowhere on the level of, I mean, obviously they're very good, but nowhere on the level of playing Arkansas and Tennessee. So I think right now, look, it's halfway through the year almost. I think Saturday is the halfway point officially in a 56-game year. And the other thing we have to think about here is, did we really expect South Carolina to be this Omaha team in year 1 under Paul Mainieri? I know he said he came here with a 1-year plan and stuff. How realistic was that, though, given what he has to work with? I think the coaching staff is doing the best they can with what they have, because it's really quite honestly, it's a little bit of a mess because you have a lot of players from the leftovers of the Mark Kingston tenure. And, you just don't have the guys that maybe you want in order to win a championship. Not saying it's not going to happen this year, but just given how things have looked in SEC play and stuff, it hasn't been great, but there's still so much season left to go. And the one thing that we know about Mainieri teams is that they get better as the year goes on. And he said it before, what the team looks like now in February and March will be different from what they look like in April and May and hopefully June. You hope this team can kind of get going here a little bit soon, because, again, the season really could start to kind of, I don't want to say fall apart, but if you get swept by Tennessee this weekend, you're 1-8 in SEC play. That's a big hole to come out of. So it's hard to be super, super positive about the team right now, but it's still very early, like I said. And I do think and give it a few more weeks here, and we'll see what kind of team really shows up, because I think Maneri will kind of get this thing going here soon.
Well, we do appreciate some of that positivity, Jack, for sure. I
It's
think
hard
it's
to find these days.
you're like, yeah, I mean, it's crazy to believe we're already at almost the halfway point
It's crazy.
in the college baseball season. I feel like it's gone by so fast, and it's clearly not been the start to conference play that South Carolina was wanting, but there's still more season left. We'll see how things shape up. And like you said, pulmonary teams tend to get better as the season goes on. So you obviously hope for that if you're South Carolina, and we'll see what happens. But I will say it's been tough these last few games for the Gamecocks, and yesterday was certainly tough. You felt like it started off really strong. I mean, again, those back-to-back home runs really set the tone here. You and I were both at the game, and the crowd was invested. You thought from that point, like, okay, South Carolina is making a statement, and unfortunately pitching yesterday just didn't allow for South Carolina to come away with the win. But more season left to be played, so we'll see what happens for the Gamecocks. A big one this upcoming weekend, so stay tuned on GamecockCentral.com. Jack will have you posted on everything you need to know with South Carolina baseball always. He does a great job. And yes, shout out to the softball team, crushing it this year and doing so well, and so much fun to watch. They've been a blast, Jack.
They've been great so far. And one more thing I'll add on baseball real quick. I'll get back to softball in a second. You mentioned the offense, and I think if any positive I actually really can take away from last night, it is the fact that the offense did make the comeback last night to tie the game. I mean, look,
100%.
That was something I forgot to add earlier, just because, look, again, for all the negatives going on with this team right now, you can't deny they did fight back last night. Again, it was just a really bad night for the pitching staff that let the game fall apart. And you were down by 5 runs going into the bottom of the 6th. And, I was at all 3 games at Arkansas, as you mentioned, Kendall. And, I just did not see any fight really offensively at the plate. And I saw so many misplays and just bad situational baseball that I'm just like, yeah, this team's done. Like, they're not going to win. But last night, for whatever reason, it just clicked. I mean, they got the bases loaded with nobody out in that 6th inning, and they bring home 4 runs. And then in the 7th, they're down by a run with 2 outs. Bo Hollins falls behind in an 0-2 count and rips a looping double out to left field to tie the game. And so, good piece of hitting there from a freshman. And I think you got to be a little bit pleased with how they fought back last night. Now, did they win? No. Did they hit super well overall? Not really. You went 4 for 19 with runners on base. You went 2 for 10 with runners in scoring position. You did a nice job of advancing runners. I will give South Carolina that. And there were different moments in this game. I really loved the hit and run they ran with, I think Jordan Carrion had gotten on base, and then Henry Kazmar lines a first pitch single into right center field. And then South Carolina gets a sac fly after that. I think that was in the 2nd inning. Very good baseball right there. But again, it really was the pitching staff that let this team down last night. And as I'm looking at the stats here, South Carolina threw 231 pitches last night, which was about 70 more than what North Carolina threw last night. Do you want to guess how many balls they threw, Kendall?
155.
Ooh, I was about to say you were getting close and then just a little bit off.
Where are we at?
108 balls and 123 strikes. For our math people out there, the strike percentage last night was 53.2%. Translation, that's not good. And you could see why there were so many free passes last night. So South Carolina's pitching obviously has a bit of a command issue, I would say. I do like the work that Terry Rooney, the pitching coach, has done with this staff so far this year. And again, I keep saying it, the coaching staff is working with what they've got, right? This is not necessarily Maneri's full-blown team, right? Like, this still has Kingston's fingerprints all over it, and we know how that time went last year at South Carolina in his final year before getting fired. So, look, my point is the offense did their part last night to win this game. Just didn't happen in the end. Pitching didn't do its job. Still a lot of season left, and again, you just got to be patient. I know that's something that's really hard for people to do these days, but, seriously, give it time, and we'll see what happens, over the next, few weeks here in the season, and then going into next year, which I think is definitely a crucial year for South Carolina to really see what they have with Paul Maneri and his staff. But softball, though, big win last night, 6-0 shutout. I mean, nothing more you can really say about that. Absolutely phenomenal game from them. I mean, it seemed like a really comfortable win for them. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I saw somewhere that was the first time Clemson's been shut out in like 54 games or something. So really impressive there. I know Clemson hasn't had a softball team for super long now, but still, I mean, who cares? I mean, they've been around for long enough to be competitive, right? And they actually have a pretty good team this year. So very good, effort from South Carolina. Neely Lamb pitched very well last night. Ariana Rhodey got a huge 3-run homer last night to get the Gamecocks going. And, yeah, the atmosphere really looked great there. And I'm happy to see softball kind of getting the respect and attendance that they kind of deserve because they've had such a good year. And it's coming off a few really, really down years. Like this program, they were in the cellar in the SEC for a few years, but now we're talking about a team that's top 10 in the country and has a huge series on the road at LSU this weekend.
Yeah, they have been so much fun to watch all season, and major congratulations to them for what they've been able to do so far. And very excited to see what they continue to do this season. But yeah, Jack, the comeback was fun to watch last night for South Carolina. Obviously, wish they could have gotten it done yesterday against North Carolina, but you just continue to roll on. You turn the page and you move on to this next series. So we'll see how it goes for the Gamecocks. And that, I think, is enough on the topic of baseball, Jack. So we're going to roll right on to football. But before we do, we've got another sponsor to give a shout out to.
That is right, Kendall. So real quick, going to talk to you guys about Prize Picks, which is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in all of North America. They're the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections. And then, of course, watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks has quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types. It's what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. I've used Prize Picks plenty of times in the past. You got Major League Baseball really starting up tomorrow with opening day. Obviously, we're both super pumped about that. You also got NHL and the playoffs coming up around the corner. No football really right now or anything. I don't think there's any spring football on there to look at on Prize Picks, but a lot of good options right now. NBA, college basketball, March Madness. So if you're interested, just go to prizepicks.com or download the Prize Picks app. Use the code on screen GC, which stands for Gamecock Central, to receive a guaranteed $50 once you play $5 in lineups.
Are you ready for Major League Baseball, Jack?
How
do you feel about your Yankees?
I'm not feeling amazing. I would be feeling a lot better if they were fully healthy, but they're not. They never really are anyway. But I'm excited, honestly. I think you know about this, Kendall, with them getting rid of the no facial hair policy.
Mm-hmm.
I am ready to see players just have full beards at Yankee Stadium tomorrow. It's going to be weird to see, but I'm really excited for the season as always, and I know you are too. So
very excited for the season. We start our AAA season on Friday, obviously opening day for the majors tomorrow. So very much looking forward to that. And Jack, you were just talking about football. No spring football, obviously, but spring practice. And the good news is at this time of the year, we get to hear from South Carolina football players, which is always exciting. It makes people really look forward to the season. We were just having this conversation last night. Like, we will be talking all football here in just a couple of months, which it is hard to believe, but it gets closer and closer day by day as we look ahead to the 2025 season for the South Carolina Gamecocks. Today at around noon, you had the chance to hear from 8 different guys, a part of South Carolina's football team. So we can get into the specifics, Jack, but first, who did you hear from and what stood out to you?
Yeah, heard from a lot of different players, as you alluded to. Heard from some offensive linemen, a lot of linebackers, Jalen Kilgore out in the secondary. I mean, just a lot of different positions, Mazio Bennett included. And honestly, the main positions where there's a lot of competition going on, this season. At edge, you got Brian Thomas Jr., who standout note that I had written down today. He does not like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I mean, that's that's crazy. I can't believe that. I mean, how could you not like PB&Js? But he's a guy that's very interesting for the fact of he is stepping into the edge room as a guy that could potentially take over as one of the starters, with Kyle Kennard no longer being at South Carolina. You have Dylan Stewart obviously on one side, but the other side is open for competition, and it feels like this is the year for BT to kind of take that next step forward and be the guy in that room. So he had a lot of good things to say today. Mazio Bennett obviously is another guy that stood out today. He's a very good talker, and honestly today, Kendall, not a lot of great talkers, I guess, in this interview, session that we had. Some guys just very short and brief, but a guy like Mazio, as you know, very, well respected on South Carolina and well spoken, and he had a lot of good things to say today.
Well, Jack, it's so hard to believe that we're already at this point. I feel like we were just at the Citrus Bowl, and it's fascinating because we think about what's coming up, and you obviously think about the transfer portal window that will open up next month, which is just another unbelievably crazy time in the world of college football. So when you think about kind of how that stacks up and when you're getting ready for spring practice, who are you most excited to watch this spring and hear about from the coaching staff in terms of their development?
I think I'm gonna go with the offensive line on this, just because we heard from a few of those guys today, and I'll kind of segue that into the conversation here. Obviously South Carolina's got to replace 3 guys on the interior with the center and then the 2 guards, with obviously Vershawn Lee at the anchor of all that at center. And then they got to replace the 2 guards. And who could fill those spots? Well, given the fact that we have spoken to Tree Babalade today and Trovon Baugh, 2 guys that you may have forgotten, but they were 2 guys starting on this offensive line as freshmen back in 2023. And then last year, coincidentally enough, they both kind of took a backseat as neither of them really started at all for the Gamecocks on the offensive line. Like I said, there were some portal additions made, and there were some moves made to improve this line. And then you had the emergence of Josiah Thompson on the left side at tackle, which was Tree's spot. And now he did say he's working everywhere right now, but what we're hearing is obviously that he's been working at guard. So I think that's very interesting and something that I'm looking forward to seeing how that shakes out for him. And then Trovon Baugh is another guy that, like I said, really didn't get to play a ton last year. Played in a few games, but never started. And he did. I asked him a little bit about that because he said it was a learning experience to go through that last year and not start. But he did say he learned a lot from a guy like Vershawn and how to be more vocal. And so that's something he's trying to take into this year. And he's been working mostly at guard and center, which guard is his position he played as a freshman. But center is interesting too, because you have other guys that are working there right now. And it'll be interesting to see how Tro works into the mix. But you can definitely tell based on the way these guys were talking today, like it was definitely humbling to have to go through that last year, not playing a ton after being, Tro was an all SEC freshman, right? You would have thought like he would have played a lot last year, started every game, but given the fact that South Carolina went out and got some vets in the portal, just didn't work out that way. And now they're going to be counting on those guys this year. And so the offensive line is definitely an area that I'm very interested to see how that shakes out this spring, because it's such a vital position to kind of, block for Lenore Sellers and keep him, off the ground.
Every year we're talking about the offensive line, and it's one of the most important and one of the most underrated position groups in the sport of football. You were talking about Mazio Bennett a little bit earlier, and I thought some of his comments today were interesting, just talking about all that kind of goes into the game and the competition in the wide receiver room. And we've talked about it many times on the show, how this year you kind of feel like South Carolina will be relying a little bit more on some of those younger guys to really step up in the wide receiver room and be those main guys for the group. So with him, it's very fascinating. He talked about some of the freshmen on the team, how hungry they are for success. So what did you take away specifically from what Mazio Bennett said today in his media availability, Jack.
Well, keep in mind, he was only, at this time last year, I mean, he was a freshman, right? Incoming freshman, looking to leave his stamp on South Carolina right out of the gate. I mean, he made it clear today that he was, and we knew this last year, that he wanted to start and play right out of the gate, which ultimately he did, as playing in 13 games and starting 4 of them for the Gamecocks last season. And he had a pretty good year, but he kind of had a coming to realization moment that, he wanted to come in and play right away and do all these good things and stuff. But he came to the realization that he has so much to learn. Like, he admitted today that, he didn't know everything. He honestly admitted that, there's a lot that he has to learn about the game of, playing college football, because it's not high school. It's totally different. And so, he had a good year last year, but there's a lot that he's taking into this season that he learned from last year. Like, number one, getting his body right, getting into stronger shape, which, wide receivers coach Mike Furry has been very impressed with his progress over the last 6 to 7 weeks here. And then also beyond that, Mazio's only a sophomore, and there are some vets in this room. Like, you have Jared Brown, Nick Harbor, who's a year older than Mazio. You have guys like that. I'll even call Dre Jacobs a little bit of a vet since he's been here now for a year. But Mazio is one of these guys that is having to find himself into a leadership role for South Carolina in the receivers room, just because you have so many young receivers on this team. I mean, you have multiple guys that come straight from high school and are joining the team now, going through their first spring practice, and they need guys to look up to and count on. And Mazio, while he is young for his, like status in football, he's an older guy now because he's been here for a year and stuff. And so he's kind of taking that responsibility head on and looking to be someone that, the guys can kind of like model what they need to do after him, and kind of be, he's not really, he's more of a, lead by, how he does it on the field example guy, rather, as opposed to, the rah-rah type of, speech type of guy. So Mazio, I really feel like is due for another good year here. Going to take a big step forward. And I did like what he had to say today about being a guy that needs to, understand that, he can't have this little kid mindset anymore. He's got to take that next step forward.
Well, if you all want all of the inside information, the quotes, the details on everything that was said today during the player media availability for South Carolina football, head over to GamecockCentral.com. It's on the Insiders Forum. Jack was there. He did a great job of writing it all out, so you can check that out and get every quote that they said today. So we just talked about a little bit of it here on GC Live, but want to give you all the opportunity to go and do that on GamecockCentral.com. Jack, we talk about the transfer portal opening here in a couple weeks, which is
crazy.
Time. I will say that. It is a time when you've got the transfer portal open. What are you on the lookout there in terms of South Carolina for with the transfer portal?
I was actually asked about this earlier today by someone, and I think receiver was something that was brought up to me, but I'm like, do you really need to go out and get a receiver? Because number one, you have Nick Harbor, Jared Brown, Mazio Bennett, a swarm of freshman guys that are looking to, make some noise this year. You have some other guys too, like Vandrevius Jacobs, amongst others. Do you really need to go out here and get another receiver? Like, I just, unless it's like a top tier guy that you can't just pass up on, I don't see the need to go out and do it. They didn't do it in the offseason, going out and getting a receiver in the portal. They recruited very well out of high school. I think you are good with what you have right now. We'll see what happens over the spring. Maybe that thought process changes. The two positions I actually do think maybe they need to go out and explore a little bit. You can never have too many defensive linemen. I think that is clearly obvious. I did hear a lot today from players talking about how Nick Barrett, one of the returnees, the few that are returning on the defensive line this year for South Carolina, has stepped into a very, very much leadership role and has taken that responsibility head on. And that's good to see. But you have a lot of filling out to do on the roster in the trenches. I mean, you're losing Tonka Hemingway, Boogie Huntley, TJ Sanders, DeAndre Jules. I mean, the list goes on and on. You're losing so many guys on the interior to where I think you went out and in recruiting, in the portal, and in high school, you brought in some key guys. But I do wonder if they still need another guy or two. Maybe that is something that they can go out and explore. And then also, I think, how's the kicker position going to look? Because that was something that was obviously very, very hit or miss last year. I mean, that was an open competition in the fall, and Alex Herrera obviously won it, but he didn't do the best. He had some missed kicks in key situations, and I think you can argue kicking last year, not that it lost you 3 games, but it cost you in a lot of spots that maybe if you make a kick in the last second against LSU or Alabama, you maybe go on and win that game. Who's to say? But I do think kicker is, just because I feel like, you have Max Kelly there right now. He's a freshman that maybe could earn the job right out of the gate here. You have some other guys, Peyton Argent, William Joyce. We'll see how Mason Love factors into the kicking competition. I think he's definitely in line to be the punter for South Carolina this season, taking over for Kai Kroger since he was the backup last year. But I do feel like they still need something at kicker. Maybe someone, if there's someone really that good available in the portal, why not take a chance? I mean, the worst that can happen is you get the guy and he just doesn't pan out.
Well, we will see what happens. It is definitely going to be interesting, that period coming up here in mid-April. So again, we always direct you there, but head to GamecockCentral.com for more. All right, I think that's going to do it for us here on GC Live today. We appreciate all of you joining us and tuning in this afternoon, and we hope you have an incredible rest of your day. So for Jack Veltri, I'm Kendall Smith. This has been GC Live here on Gamecock Central, and we'll see you soon. Bye.